All right, part two. I actually started shooting this, and then my dog, who was outside, started barking, so I had to stop it. So this is part two, shoot two. Uh, so imagine if you're in a very, very difficult situation, or you're in a difficult emotional, mental state. Now, let's say you're just a normal person who is in that state. I think there's a tenant like there's usually an inner dialogue or an inner monologue that's going on. You might pay attention to what's the nature of that interior monologue or dialogue going on. I would be willing to bet that for most people, it's something like this. This is a lot. This is too much for me. I can't handle it. Or, God, I need to try to find a way out of this. Now, if one we're in a situation where when we're talking with a therapist, counselor, coach, mentor, friend, one might be saying, yeah, my life is so hard, or I'm in such a bad place. I don't know how to deal with it. It's just too much for me, or something like that. And if one is the religious type and one is praying, one might be praying to a God of some kind, saying something like, God, uh, this is too much. Can you help me with this? Can you can you kind of remove these difficulties for me? Yeah. Or can you, I mean, more or less, I think the intent behind any of these situations, the intent might be the intent or the thought, the sentiment, attitude might be, it's too much. It would be nice if the stress, the situation, the emotional state, the anger, the depression, the loneliness, the jealousy could be decreased. I imagine that for most humans, that's the response that one has to a very, very difficult state. That's the heart of what one is feeling or thinking. And now going back to the first story again, in the first video, there's an intent behind taking notes of this should help me, but I pointed that there might be an unintended message that it's sending toward oneself. And that message, I would say, might be more important than the actual intent of. So in this case, the intent might be something like, I can't take it, it's too hard, or it's too much, or I need a relief. But in that attitude, I would say that there's an unintended message that it's sending to oneself, which is, uh, I can't deal with it. I mean, that's literally what's being said, but it's more Yuichi. If it's to myself, it's Yuichi, you're weak and you can't deal with it. It's too much for you because you're not that strong. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to draw a parallel between the story in the first video and this common human reaction to a difficult situation is, oh, it's too much. So it's I can't quite make the parallel across the board about a safety net and so on, but I want to go straight to, well, what might be an alternative? And I want to give an alternative for two types of audiences here. One, the more, I don't know, the more God believing, the more religious, some would call more religious, some would call more spiritually minded person who believes in God and so on and talks to God. Um, and then for the person who kind of lives independent of that kind of belief system. So let's suppose that one is a praying type and one is talking to God. And so, by the way, I should say for myself that I consider myself kind of like I don't know if there's a word for it, but like some people are meat eaters, carnivores, and some are vegans. But I think it's possible, for example, to be a meat eater on the week during the week and then a vegan on the weekend. Yeah. So what would one call oneself? It's not a carnivore and it's not a vegan. It's not just an omnivore because one isn't just eating everything all the time. So during the week, all one eats is like steak and bacon, and then on the weekend, all one eats is vegan, just vegetables. Uh, there isn't a good label, and I sort of see myself that way. Is that yeah? Sometimes this God thing feels real, and other times I don't really care about it, and it doesn't really matter to me. And I'm comfortable operating in either mode. And when I'm in one mode, I don't think, oh, the other mode might be better. Or I'm in this mode. I don't think the other mode might be better. I just think, oh, these are two modes of being, and I like both of them. So, so when I'm in this prayer mode and I'm in a difficult situation, there's a prayer that I do, which I find helpful when I'm in a difficult situation. And the prayer is pretty simple. It's more or less something like, God, whatever is being put upon me, uh, maybe you could double or triple it. I'm good with that. Yeah. And and if I'm in kind of in an angry mood, like let's say I'm beset with a lot of anger, then I sort of think about the scene. I think it's from the Truman Show, the movie The Truman Show, and maybe I just made it up, but I think it's from that movie where I sort of look up toward the heavens and I just sort of think, is this all you got? And usually there's some cussing, like, is this all you really got? I'm not going to cuss here, I guess, but, and that's the attitude. Yeah. And that's the prayer is this all you got? I can take way more than this. Now, I think it takes a certain level of gumption or courage to make a prayer like that. Is, yeah, why don't you just double or triple or quadruple the amount of stress and suffering that's being heaped upon me? But the underlying message that I find that I'm sending to myself is I'm basically saying, I'm much bigger than this. I'm much bigger than this difficulty. I'm much bigger than this suffering. And what I find when I make that kind of prayer or just rant, it's basically a rant. It's basically a big complaint to the universe. It doesn't have to be God. It can just be to life. Like, life, is this all you fucking got? Right? Uh, the message I'm sending to myself is I'm much bigger than this. And what I find is I actually find relief because what seemed a huge problem, what seemed a problem that was much bigger than me, instantly in that moment becomes small and I become much larger than it. And at that point, there isn't a sense of being overwhelmed. There isn't a sense of, I can't take it. There's a sense of, oh, I'm much stronger than I thought. I'm much more capable than I conceptualized myself as being. So that's for that population. Now, if one doesn't want to deal with that, you know, in Buddhism, in the Dharma, there's a wonderful form of meditation that actually accomplishes the same thing. And it's a form of meditation that some of you are probably familiar with. And it's called Tonglen. And the name doesn't really matter, but the form of meditation is something like this. You imagine suffering, whether it's in the form of physical suffering like cancer or emotional suffering like depression or uh, or sadness or whatever, or fear, and you imagine this in other people because most people have it, and then you imagine it as a darkness inside of them, and then you breathe in and out like normal, but on your in breath you imagine sucking all that darkness from other people inside of you. And then you imagine whatever goodness or light that you have inside of you going to them. And that's the meditation. But I hope you can see that meditation is the exact same thing as the quasi prayer that I mentioned, right? It's basically, so you're starting in a place of darkness, of great difficulty, a great ordeal. Like, let's say I'm beset with depression, a deep darkness, yeah? So I imagine all the depressed people and I'm taking in their depression. So what am I doing? It's the same thing. I'm saying I can take on more than what I have, even though I feel overwhelmed in the moment, but I can take on more. And you know, one of the first persons who shared this meditation with me was an actual human being. And what she said to me was what she was taught is that the fundamental point of this meditation, at least as she explained it to me, was to, to tell ourselves that we're capable of taking on more difficulty than we think, which is what I said about the prayer. So so we might be thinking, wow, I don't want to take on more, like let's say you're depressed. I don't want to take on other people's depression and bring, you know, increase it by 1,000-fold. But in fact, the underlying message the unintended message that's being sent to self is, I can handle way more than what's happening. And this meditation, I think, is better than the quasi prayer I mentioned because uh, there's a secondary sort of thing that's happening with this meditation is that when we do this, the action of wanting to take suffering from others so that we can take it ourselves is a compassionate act. So we're practicing compassion within that meditation. And compassion is like a light. It's like a light in the darkness. If you're in a dark room, all it takes is a little flicker of a light to light the room. And so that act of compassion begins to lighten the darkness. And 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 there's a sense of relief that comes from that. So it doesn't really matter whether one is a believer or non-believer because I think there are tools and methods that can be applied regardless of one's belief system or perspective or worldview. But I just wanted to share those two approaches. They're basically, I see them as the exact same approach, just using a different frame to dealing with a difficult situation. Again, it's not, I don't think it's about the intent. It's about what's the unintended consequence? What's the unintended message that's being sent by something we do? Just like with a note taking, there's an unintended message that it sends to my own intelligence. And when we're in a difficult situation, every attempt to lessen the suffering, I shouldn't say every attempt, but many of our methods of trying to reduce our suffering, I think, sends a message of I'm not capable of handling it. And so then we rise up to that level of self-expectation, is my experience. But if I send the message, if I say, well, I can take on more. I can take on more of this difficulty, more of this loneliness, more of this sadness, more of this grief, more of this anger, more of this stressful situation. And I think that, or I do the meditation, what I find again is the unintended message is I'm much bigger, I'm much more capable. And then the self has the capacity to rise to that expectation. So you might try that.